He kōna I purangi tēnei nā te reo irirangi o Aotearoa.
Kia ora, piki mai kake mai ki te au hurihanga. Hello and welcome to Our Changing World, ko Clachan Canana ho. Late last year, Te Whanganui Tara, Wellington, welcomed a small flock of North Island brown kiwi back to the city's west coast. Kiwi had once thrived in the rugged hills on the fringe of the capital more than 150 years ago, but were driven out when stoats were released to control rabbits. Now they've returned to take up residence again as part of one of the country's largest rewilding missions, the Capital Kiwi Project. Science journalist Veronika Meduna brings us the story of the return of the kiwi. She joined the Pōwhiri in the Makara Hills at the western edge of Wellington last November.
It's a very special homecoming. Iwi and the Makara community, landowners and wind farm operators are all gathered at the local school to welcome 11 kiwi back to the wilds of Wellington. These birds are the pioneers, the first of 250 North Island brown kiwi that will eventually return over the next 6 years to settle in the Manuka-covered hills around the capital city. They've travelled a long way, gifted by the Otorohanga Kiwi House and Ngāti Hinewai to return to Taranaki Whānui ki te upoko o te ika and the local community. After the Pōwhiri, each bird is set up with a transmitter and then taken to the ready-made burrows in the hills, while the community continues to celebrate. Ngāti Hinewai elder Tom Roa has accompanied the Manu on their long journey back home.
Tēnā koutou katoa e whakarongo mai nā ki tēnei reo wirirangi e mihi ana kia koutou tātou katoa e kaha nei te whakaaro ki te taiao heo tira kia rangi nui e tu iho nei kia papatua anuku e takoto nei. Tēnā koutou katoa.
Kia ora.
My name is Tom Roa. I'm a kaumātua, an elder of Ngāti Hinewai, Ngāti Maniapoto, from the King Country area of middle of the North Island. For more than 40 years, our hapu, our iwi, has strongly supported the introduction and the continued activity with the Otorohanga Kiwi House. And it has done an amazing job, so successful in fact that birds, not just kiwi, kaka, kārearea, a number of native species that have been cared for at the Kiwi House have been repatriated and are repopulating areas all over Aotearoa, New Zealand. And that's part of what is happening here today.
So those birds, those kiwi, do they have a connection to this place?
Yes. We were particularly keen that the matriarch of the breeding pairs that we brought here today, Anahera, is 42 years old, probably 44 years old, and she is still producing progeny. She was rescued along with a couple of her siblings from Taranaki and formed a part of that beginning group of birds that have been cared for at the Otorohanga Kiwi House. So we were particularly keen to bring Anahera here to return her to her people.
Anahera has already produced many offspring, and the hope for the Capital Kiwi Project is that she'll keep going and help the younger birds to settle into their new home. The transmitters the birds carry help the team to track and monitor their whereabouts, but apart from that, they're left to explore their new surroundings.
Everyone happy? Yep.
2 months later, I'm back to find out how things have gone.
Kia ora, my name's Paul Ward.
Paul is the founder and leader of the Capital Kiwi Project, one of the first landscape-scale projects to be funded by Predator-Free 2050. The initial idea was ambitious, but also simple. Kiwi once thrived in these hills, so why not do everything possible to return them? But before the community could welcome the birds back, they had to put in years of work to clear thousands of pests. This is the largest community-owned stoat trap network in the country, 4,500 traps across 23,000 hectares. And all of this to make sure any Kiwi chicks have a good chance to survive.
As an egg, they've got some solid design features, so a rat can't get its mouth around the egg, it's so big. And as adults, kiwi can get up to, like a big brown kiwi's like 3.5 kilos, so it can fight off all comers except for ferrets, which thankfully we don't have in the landscape, and uncontrolled dogs. So in the 80s and 90s, when they first started studying kiwi chicks, they realised what was happening was those chicks were getting predated before they could get up to that weight where they could look after themselves. So it's a bit like an old growth forest where when those big old trees start falling down, there's no saplings coming up to replace them. So a lot of places where we thought kiwi were doing really well and fine were old birds that, because they can live 45, 50 years in the wild. And once those birds were dying, those populations were slowly marching towards extinction. So in order to look after kiwi in the wild, we've got to do something about that predator threat on the chicks. So our job is really to provide an environment in which we can get them up to that weight in which they can look after themselves. And our mission is to try to remove all the stoats from this landscape. It's never been done before on the mainland. But even in the striving, we know that we will be getting stoats down to a low enough level to be able to grow a thriving kiwi population.
Long, hot summer days in here.
We are standing above Shepherd's Gully, which is about 1,000 hectares, 5 kilometres long. And we're looking down the ridge where the first 11 kiwi were released just over 2 months ago. And where we're standing, we can see all the way north to Rangatui, to Colonial Knob, to Porirua, Titahi Bay. And if I span round, we've got looking to Mount Koko, Tarikaka, all the way over to Wellington Harbour. I can see Makara Peak, the mountain bike park, and then keeping going round to the south, I can see the South Island, and that whole area, which is roughly 24,000 hectares, so for comparison, slightly bigger than Abel Tasman National Park, is covered in 4,500 stoat traps, so that's a cloak of protection to enable kiwi to come back. This network was first deployed in late November 2018, so it's 4 years of work with iwi mana whenua, with over 100 landowners, and our passionate local supporters in all those communities, from Makara, the four-wheel drivers checking traps on Te Kopaho above Red Rocks, the mountain bikers checking traps in Makara Peak. And all that work has resulted in an environment in which our Kiwi Guardians are comfortable to have those birds released into the wild.
So yeah, quite exciting really to have a landscape scale pest control project like this right on Wellington's doorstep.
Jeff Hall is a field ranger for the Capital Kiwi Project, managing the predator trapping and kiwi monitoring. And he's recently moved to Makara himself to be as close as he can to the relocation area.
In terms of the trapping network, across, as Paul said, 23,000 hectares, it's an immense landscape, and it's based on a recipe of what they've used for island eradications in the past, with a density of traps where trap lines are only no more than 1 kilometre apart, and there's traps every 100 metres along those lines.
Well, how do you do it in terms of the people power behind it? Who's walking along those trap lines to check them?
Well, we are, I guess, quite blessed within this landscape to have an infrastructure that's already so well established. So many of our big areas of the project are sort of major landowners that also have wind farms on them. And so with all that becomes all the roading and access infrastructure. And then, with them being working farms as well, lots of farm tracks. So we're pretty lucky. We don't have to do a whole lot of walking.
Sometimes we joke that this is like trapping for old men, but it's in that you can do most of the lines from the ute or from the LUV, the quad. Just as a comparison, traditionally trapping's been seen as prohibitively expensive. So in places like Fiordland, where you have to jump in a helicopter or a boat and then you've got to accommodate labour, there can be quite significant cost to trapping. And as a Resolution Island and Fiordland, which is roughly similar size to our project area, they had to cut, I think it was about 400 kilometres of tracks from scratch when they put that network in there. We've had to cut, I think it's less than 3 kilometres of tracks across that whole network. So the farming, roading, Meridian Transpower roads, that infrastructure has been just an enormous boon to being able to get that cloak of protection on the ground.
A few weeks after the birds' arrival, the team carried out a health check on each of them. They were relieved to find that all stayed in the area and have settled in well. Some even put on weight, but others snapped their beaks at the ready-made accommodation and dug their own homes, and some linked up with new mates and started exploring a bit further afield. For Raviri Walsh, following the birds as they make their new homes has special meaning.
Tēnā koe. Ko Taranaki te maunga, ko Waimapihi te awa, ko Taropa te marae, ko Hemiparai Rawa, ko Tawhirikura Karopihia, Ngā Tupuna, ko Rawiri Walsh tōku ingoa.
Now you have a connection to the birds that have arrived here, the first 11 manu that have come here.
Yes, so these birds, like Taranaki whānui, have whakapapa to Taranaki, so being Western North Island Browns. As with the tangata, we migrated from Taranaki to Whanganui-a-Tara, and these birds, through their migration through Otarahanga, have made their way down to the same area.
Does it feel like a return?
Yeah, it's pretty special. I mean, as we all know, we utilise these manu for our everyday purposes. The modern equivalent of the sheep. They fed us, they clothed us. And they were very special. So having them here on our back doorstep, kind of reconnects us to these manu and to the whenua.
I'd imagine as they were handed over, it must be hard to let them go, into possibly a better environment in many ways, but also an environment with more risk than in a captive breeding program.
I wasn't down at the school. I was up here with the release, and we're fortunate to have 2 members from Maniapoto from Ngāti Henewai who were filming, in particular Anahera, and during her placement into the burrow, it was obvious to us that it should have been one of them to place her in there, and so they performed a karakia and had a wee kōrero to her as they were doing so, and it was a very pretty special moment for us all to be a part of. And in particular, the care and attention and the love that we really went into saying goodbye to someone so special, to a member of their whānau. To keep an eye on them, each kiwi has been equipped with a little transmitter that emits at a certain radio frequency. Aerial and receiver in hand, Jeff and Paul are homing in on 40-plus-year-old matriarch Anahera.
Anahera on the move.
I'd hazard a guess. See all that
brackeny
stuff over there?
Yeah.
Tracking birds in this sort of landscape, the topography can really make it a little bit challenging until you really tune into the strength of the signal and the direction. Sometimes, line of sight straight across a gully like this, the signal can be really strong, whereas if, say, she was down the slope in front of us here, because you haven't got line of sight, that radio signal can be quite distorted and a lot weaker than, even though she's closer. So it's learning those little things in your landscape that help you when you start sort of tracking these birds.
And so you're thinking Anahira's moved for food or for shelter?
Moved, quite a few hundred metres there from where we encountered her last week. So,
I suppose, just to describe the kind of landscape we're in, it's classic scrubby North Island hill country. So we've got regenerating manuka where there's water, or seepages. We've got tree ferns, mamaku, and mahoi, and you can see those green strips down the hills and things when we look across them. So also quite dense tauhinu, cottonwood, bracken, scrub country, Kiwi country.
Yeah. Bird or person.
Yeah.
So who are we trying to track now?
So now we've come down into Shepherd's Gully, and we're having a look for whiro, one of our male birds. So just recently when we caught all our birds for health checks, we discovered whiro sitting on an egg, which was a pleasant surprise for us all and quite exciting.
So that's our first egg in the wild in the west of Wellington in a heck of a long time.
Yeah.
And we certainly were not expecting to find an egg, because what that means is whiro and his partner Taina have gotten down to business pretty soon after arriving back in Wellington. So I can't remember, someone described it as our capital love chick.
Yeah. And the tracking or the transmitter actually can confirm for you that he's sitting on a nest?
Yes, so at the moment, and I might just turn it up a little and you might hear, so that beeping, or the pulse rate, is now beeping at a rate of 48 beeps per minute. So normally when we're tracking birds day to day, the transmitters are pulsing at 30 pulses a minute, which tracks the fact that the bird is alive and it's moving around.
A good way of describing it is it's like a Fitbit for the Kiwi, isn't it? It's, tracks their movement and their patterns during the day. Their
activity. So normally whiro would be out, from dusk till dawn feeding, 8 to 10 hours a night. Whereas in that state, the transmitter's pulsing at 30 beeps a minute. When his activity drops right off, it means he's spending more of his night relatively sedentary, or sitting on an egg potentially, and that's when the transmitter learns that activity and switches. So now it's pulsing at 48, which means yes, this whiro is incubating.
Excellent news, I would say. So what are we going to do here now today?
One of the challenges of monitoring these kiwi in terms of getting video footage of them is getting reliable roost sites. And so that was quite easy when we released them, because we knew that those burrow sites, but as they're out on the hills now in the wild making their own homes, it's quite hard for us to ascertain where those sites are. So because we know that whiro is incubating, we know where that site is, we're going to chuck a couple of trail cameras on there because we can.
And then you'll see exactly what he does, when he leaves, when he comes back.
That's right. So it just adds a little bit more information to us, to understanding how they're making themselves at home back on the hills here.
It's been more than 150 years since this has happened. A pair of kiwi incubating an egg in the Wellington Hills. Excited but trying to be as quiet as we possibly can, Rawiri and I carefully move a little closer to have a look.
So we've just come into the area where both whiro, the male, and Taina, the female, are. And we've just had to do a bit of a loop around Taina to avoid disturbing her. And we've found whiro, who is on the nest and sitting on the egg. And we're just staying quiet and whispering to not disturb him too much, while Jeff will go in a bit closer and put a trail camera on the nest.
Yeah. So he'd be snoozing away at the moment, right?
Yeah.
Keeping the egg warm and just kind of having a daytime snooze as you do when you're kiwi. And his only feeding would be at night, briefly.
Night, only for a few hours at a time, and then he'll go back in just to keep the egg warm. So obviously on a hot summer's day like today, underneath this Macacarpa grove, it's nice and cool under here. And if we were to reach our hand in the burrow, it would be even cooler in there. So the burrows are nice and cool in summer and then nice and warm in winter.
Perfect spot for them, eh? So with these two, they've obviously found the best spot to build their burrow or their nest. But she can't have arrived with an egg already on the way, could she?
No, she couldn't, because they've been here over 60 days now, and it takes 30 days from copulation for the egg to be laid. So these two here, we say they're in the deluxe suite with nice, cool, warm area during the day, and then lots of feed surrounding us with wetlands. Recently spoke to a friend around the fact that they have laid an egg, and he used to work at the zoo doing rearing eggs, and he said that for this to have happened, these birds have hardly been disturbed in their translocation. So it's a really real big pat on the back for everyone involved in that translocation and how well that went.
When Jeff and Paul finally emerge from setting up the trail camera, they ponder what might happen to this chick and any future ones as the kiwi population hopefully grows. So with a lot of kiwi on the mainland, a lot of populations, their eggs would normally be taken just to make sure that the chicks have a good chance of survival. Not in this case?
Well, there's two ways of recovering kiwi, and one is Operation Nest Egg, as you mentioned, which has been very successful, and that's when the eggs get removed and then taken to a predator-free environment and returned to the wild when they're at that stoat-proof weight. It's very intensive and expensive, and the other way of recovering kiwi, which has also been done in many places around the country, is to deal to that predator threat, deal to that stoat threat in the wild, so that enough chicks can get up to that adult weight and grow a healthy population.
One thing about O&E is the taking of eggs away from males while they sit on the egg, and that's for the benefit of the chick to ensure survival. But one of the things I guess we don't know, and from a mana whenua perspective, is what that is doing for the male. So they're not carrying on that natural cycle of him sitting on the chick and continuing on with that. And then if we've had egg after egg taken away, then how is that affecting both parents as well as the chick learning behaviours?
Yeah, while this is, I guess, the first egg, we're hoping and expecting that into the future we get a lot more eggs with more pairs as more birds are translocated, which will allow us to then monitor a portion of chicks for survival. So we're looking at, as a minimum, monitoring 20 chicks through to about 1.2 kilos once they're big enough to defend themselves, just to see, while we do a lot of trapping for predators, and we've got trap catch data and a lot of monitoring around, the numbers of stoats in the landscape, the survival of the chicks will be the real test.
Yeah, and I guess it's worth pointing out that even before people came, there was a lot of chick mortality, so probably roughly 50% of eggs that hatched, 50% of chicks would have made it through to adulthood. So when you hear the statistic that up to 95-100% of unmanaged kiwi populations, up to 95-100% of those chicks are eaten by stoats, in order to grow a kiwi population, you've got to have roughly 1 in 5 chicks survive. So we're aiming to do much better than that, but it is, it's a wild, unfenced environment, and we, with the weight of landowner community, mana whenua support, we've created as safe and healthy an environment for the kiwi as it's possible to do. So,
and these are the first 11. I guess there's more to come.
Yeah, these are the first 11 of 250 birds that we're permitted to move into the project area, and ultimately, what we'd like to have is a self-sustaining, wild, free-ranging population of kiwi where they can live as they have done for 80 million years on these hills. So, they've had first dibs here for a long time, and our job really is to kind of lay out the welcome mat for their homecoming. Ultimately, over, where we're standing right now, we're a ridge away from Karori Golf Course, a couple of ridges away from Makara Peak Mountain Bike Park and the suburb of Karori. So as these kiwi establish here in the coming years, they will start to push out closer to people, and hopefully we're ready to be guardians of the animal who has gifted us its name and identity.
The return of the Kiwi is a special project for everyone involved, but for Paul and Jeff, it's also deeply personal.
For me personally, having grown up here, having family connections that go back 7 or 8 generations, you know, my great-great-great-grandparents, they're buried just up the hill here. They would have heard birds like huia, like kaka and kiwi. And so we're restoring a small part of the life of these hills, I guess.
Yeah,
way of describing.
I know. Like for me, on I suppose a bit of a personal note, and prior to joining the project here, I was working on offshore islands around Wellington here, and growing up a young family on those islands. So on Mana, we had kiwi in the backyard, and we'd hear them calling at night, and they were under the deck some nights. It was quite a privileged situation to be in, but to have now this opportunity where that privilege can be shared with the local community and those people, as Paul said, just over the hill here, is pretty remarkable.
In Wellington, we've gone from, I grew up in Johnsonville in the 90s, and there was maybe a toho, waxeye, fantail. That's it, really. Blackbirds, possums at night, no native birds. And the resurgence in Wellington's been quite remarkable. We're one of the few cities in the world that's actually increased its biodiversity over a generation and a half. And that's thanks to a whole combo of things: Zealandia, community trapping, umbrella efforts like Predator Free Wellington and Capital Kiwi, council possum control. But the result of all that mahi is that I've gone from a reality of blackbirds and possums. My kids in Newtown are growing up with tui, kereru, kaka, kariere every morning. And this is just really about adding a very special K to that list. And fundamentally, if our relationship with a bird like a kiwi, with kaka, ends up being behind a fence or on an offshore island or in a zoo, then we'll lose our connection and our relationship with them. And if we lose that connection, we'll lose the aroha, or the desire to care for them. So it's really about fostering guardianship, and we know that we can look after kiwi, we can recover kiwi populations. People like Pete and Jeff have spent their whole careers proving that it can be done. So for us, really, it's about doing it in the backyard of our capital city.
Sadly, not long after Veronika's visit, the Capital Kiwi team went out to check on the birds again and found that Fido had left his nest because the egg wasn't viable. It's not an unusual outcome. About half of all kiwi eggs laid don't make it to hatching for natural reasons. But the fact that the pair produced an egg is still a sign that the birds are happy in their new home. A big thank you to Paul Ward, Jeff Hall and Rawari Walsh from the Capital Kiwi Project, as well as to Tom Roa from Ngāti Hinawai. This story was produced by Veronika Meduna and engineered by William Saunders. Production help, as always, from Ellen Rikers, and Tim Watkin is executive producer of podcasts and series at RNZ. Remember to search your favourite podcast app for Our Changing World and follow the show to get new weekly downloads. The show's website is at rnz.co.nz/ourchangingworld, where we'll put up photos and links for this episode, and you can listen to our extensive back catalogue, including lots of Kiwi-related content. Plus, we're on Twitter and Facebook. Look for @RNZScience. Don't forget that there are a whole range of amazing RNZ podcasts for you to explore and enjoy. Simply click on the Podcasts and Series tab on the RNZ webpage to find your next series to binge. Tēnā koe I whakarongo mai. Thanks for listening. Ko Claire Kincannon ahau. Have a great week. Kia pai, tō wiki.